I've been roommates with Asan for the longest time. He's always screaming in classes and debates in the hall, which I usually get annoyed by. It's only when he explained what counterfactuals, meta, and all those jargons are is when I decided to take my first time in debate today. Um, First piece of framing, right? What's the state of debate right now? The debate as a sport is seen as too niche in general, right? Or it's very academic in nature. It becomes increasingly so, especially when people see motions that are not really palatable to the layperson, right? It's filled with a lot of jargon. It fills with all these info slides which we had to read. That's why we vetoed the third motion, I think. So it's so technical, it's so filled with meta, and it's not seen as a sport that is very engaging. It's not seen as a sport where people actually want to have a community behind, right? And the reason behind that is because people don't actually know about debate, right? People don't know how competitive it can get. People don't know how loud rooms can get, right? The different types of speakers that exist, the different types of styles, the different types of arguments that come up with that. A lot of these things are not really apparent to the layperson, right? Especially things like the HWS round robins where all the best debaters are actually debating the most insane motions, where you get the most insane arguments. We don't actually see this. People don't actually know about this except the debate community alone. So it's such a niche thing, right? But then the thing here is how do we then propose the specific solution here is first to have this fantasy debate league, right? And how will this actually look like? First thing, you have things like AI speech trackers or just speech trackers in general, where they can just track the speech content accurately. Like, and these are already things that exist. These are things that in your Microsoft Teams, these are things in Zooms, and these things already exist in nature, right? But then what we want here is these things to be likely developed by debaters, just like all your tabs and stuff like that. But it's also open source and there's no privacy breach, so there's continuous development that can exist, and debaters have an incentive to be woke and make sure it's also done well, right? So it's also the way that in which costs are being allocated, the ways in which each tag is being done. All of these are also not discriminatory in nature, and this is why debaters will make sure of that, and I'm sure of that. And secondly, we can also scrape data from tabs, right? We can look at all the motions that are there, all the scores that are there, all the mechanics and all the manual impacts of this debate, right? The developers of the app can actually manually update this. It can be like a live tracking thing so that people can actually get a lot of these data on your apps. Just like fantasy football, right? If you make it simpler, like you get all your scores, you get all your goal scorings, your tackling, your assists and stuff like that. You can get these statistics as well. Okay. So people can then compare this to all the different types of debates that exist, right? Like your APs and your BPs. You can combine different debaters together, like your star team, for example, right? For me, I'll probably have Asan and David Africa or something like that. So you can get all of these things, and you can see how these things will start to manifest, especially after each and every round that happens, right? So why then do I propose a specific solution? Because this is the proven model that actually works. This is not something that is new. These are things that already existed, right? These things like FPL, FFL in the US, where millions of people actually just play this, right? Millions of people are behind this because it's so engaging in nature, right? So because we are using a proven model that works, and because prediction markets make it very famous, people will then get into this because the uncertainty is something that's exciting to them, like having your own teams and then watching how they perform in nature. What would they actually say? And then after that, coming back like, oh shit, I shouldn't have chosen this person, maybe I should choose a different person instead. Then you get more invested in debate, you get more invested in speeches, you get more invested in the logics behind debate. These are things that matter, right? So, and this is the best way, the second thing, this is the best way to break the debate black box, right? Like what I explained just now. Right now, it's so hard to understand the sport. Even when Asan screams in the hall, I don't know what jargon he's saying, right? I have to ask him to explain to me what is he actually saying. But with this, we can understand the sport much better, right? With the creation of this debate fantasy league, it will allow for more debate stats to be tracked as well, because now you have more people behind it. People want to analyze the sport a lot more. People want more meta, okay? So why other things don't work then? Why don't things like debate workshops or debate videos and stuff like that works later? Because this is not as engaging in nature. Right? When I also watch all these debate workshops and stuff, I just don't get it because it's just like an endless cycle of hourly long videos, which is not very engaging in nature. And then this is what ends the monotonous cycle of debate. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, even with sure all these apps, all these tools, how is it going to reach people outside of the debate circle?
Yes, it reached people outside the legal system in the second argument, but let me just quickly explain that first. Because of its engaging engaging nature of this debate fantasy league, and because there's so much hype behind it, because people start talking about it a lot more, there's a lot more prediction that is involved. Because right now when I'm going talking to my friends and stuff like that, I probably have the app, I probably explain to them, oh, these are the people that are in this app, you do understand, these are the stats that is happening, these are the things that I've already projected or manifested in the future. These are things that create more conversation about the sport, it creates more awareness about the sport, right? But then it's actually the title of my first argument, which is how we increase access and the reach of debate, right? Because debate is already seen as too niche and too academic. People don't see it as something that's engaging, as I've already said repeatedly, right? Especially within the new generation of students, right? They don't do a lot of reading in data. It's just more brain rot, more TikTok, more doom scrolling. They don't feel the need to be interested in debate, because if I actually am interested in debate, I go onto YouTube and I see hourly long videos again, which does not feed my doom scrolling nature, right? Why this matters then is because if we actually care about the debate, and if we actually care about the continuity of debate, right, where debate is lacking a lot of fresh blood, where all the professionals are eventually going to continue into their careers, right? We need this to happen because this creates more motivation for younger people to join debate, right? But it also allows for the diversity of the sport, right? Where there's no more repeated arguments, right? Where there's better arguments from these people with diverse backgrounds from different socioeconomic classes, right? Having different perspectives of how to approach certain things. So this is when we get better arguments, better innovations in motions, and this is when we get better innovation of the sport in general. But how do we get this then, right? The debate sport becomes a lot more engaging because there's this betting mechanism that exists, right? Drafting debaters before the tournament comes up. It creates an anticipation and hype for the debate, right? There's also tab stalking when that happens, right? Because you then go into the tab, look into like, oh, the round to round performances, what are the motions, what are the styles of arguments, etc. But because you want to see how your debaters are doing, the debaters that you selected, right? Because the gamified aspect of it is actually choosing the debaters before the tournament actually happens. So you will actually be invested in how the tournament is actually going, right? You want to see what is actually manifesting from your predictions. So the gamified aspect of it is the one that makes it very interesting, right? A lot of debates are seen as mundane and a lot of waiting time, and it takes so long. This cuts through that narrative. For example, you can try out different pairings, simulate different major performances. This can't happen in the real world as often, right? You have to wait for open tournaments and stuff like that, right? So the quantification that we get, the statistics that I can get with all of these things, because it's such an open source thing that we're trying to develop here with different strategies, that is where we get a lot more important statistics and a lot more better ways to understand debate. How we improve the discourse that happens in debate is, right now it's too niche, it's filled with elitist ideas. On our side, it's where we get a more diverse background, it's where we get more better quality of debate. So proud to post.
I'm audible, right? Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Golf runs an extremely idealistic case where they assume that the people that you're actually betting on aren't real people that you have to interact with like all the time, right? Because let's be so for real, the people who are going to engage in fantasy debate betting are the people who are debating. There are no people outside of that that are going to be participating. And this is true because realistically, if you like start talking about fantasy debate betting to your friends, and like my boyfriend tells me that he's engaging in this, I'm gonna just be like, shut up, like why are you talking about this? I don't give a fuck, like I just don't care, right? Why do people then care? I don't understand. Just because you talk about the concept of betting, then why this is going to appeal to the masses and people are just suddenly going to get into it. And also I don't understand how debate, like fantasy debate betting, translate into them understanding debate. People want to bet then. People don't want to understand debate. People don't necessarily want to like understand like the motion types and like how to debate and then suddenly start debating. I don't see the logical link here and I don't think it's explained to me. No, sit down. Like, then we actually have to talk about what fantasy debate betting actually looks like. I think then, like, we have to talk about how this is it's a league, right? So it has to be a series of tournaments, which means that you have to take like a speaker, let's say like, I don't know, Shireen goes to like multiple opens and like then she goes to UADC at the end of AP season because it's a season, right? At the end of AP season it would be UADC, at the end of BP season it would be ABP. Like, and then you would monitor the performance of this particular speaker throughout like the season, right? Okay, and but the problem is then like the further you go, the more points you will gain. Like, and then you accumulate points, and that's how this betting will necessarily work, right? On like the app or like whatever tool you use. And the problem is the tool is not the problem, or like it's not really important. The problem then is that this is an actual person in debate. And I don't think the idea of debate is really taken into consideration from Gov, just because like the way that debate works is so like variant. Like there's so many factors that could affect like a certain open or a certain tournament, right? Because there's so many things that are like particularly different. Like
You know what?
yeah, sure.
After months. Like whether
It's a bit more consistent than debate at the very least, right? Because in football, like at the very least, you have like the same field, you have the same players, and the players are hired to do that job, you know? Like that's the actual job. Debates have lives outside of debate. Debate is a hobby. It is not something that they are contracted to necessarily do, right? Unless they like are really like particularly committed to it. Even then, like people have like off days or off tournaments where like there's just something else happening. Maybe they're doing their thesis and like they just don't do well at an open, right? And this affects them as well. Like then like it's different from fantasy football because those are like just contracted players where things are just more consistent. In debate, you don't know what the pool is going to be. Sometimes it's just a shit open where the pool is just not good, where the judge pool is just not good, where the motions are just not good and unbalanced, and there's an extreme power imbalance then, right? No. And there's an extreme power imbalance there, right? And this is particularly problematic because then it affects the way that the betting happens, right? And this is also extremely problematic going into my first argument, just because like it's rigged from the start, like and like just it's going to affect the way that you go to opens, the way that you interact with people that you have to see. Because realistically, when you go to opens, when you go to ADC and ABP, these are the people that you are betting on, that other people are betting on, are people that you're going to interact with, right? Like the people who are like judging you then like have an incentive to like just be biased, right? It's probably the most extreme like version of like judge biases. Even if it's not like the judge themselves like betting, it's probably going to be their contingent betting on a certain speaker and or like a certain team, right? And this is particularly problematic because then it like just makes everything extremely unfair. And we try to make debate as fair of a space as possible, but allowing that to be fantasy debate betting means that it becomes the most extreme version of like this biases being able to exist. We don't think it should exist in the first place. Okay, so also then like the heavy power imbalance will also affect you mentally because like debaters are already under so much of stress, like trying to do well at like whatever tournament they go to. Knowing that people are actively betting on them is just going to fuck them up. It's going to make them feel so bad about themselves. Like you then like attach so much of your self-worth even more to your performance. And think about how many debaters that you know that already attach so much of their self-worth to their performance, to their achievements, to the way that they like actually perform during like big tournaments, right? Like this is just going to exacerbate that to a like extreme level. And if they're your friends, the way that you interact with these people in your personal relationships, right, and the way that you socialize with them is going to be different because these people then actively know that you're betting on them and that you think that they can go far. And you may say that this means that like, oh, like this means that you believe in them, right? And it's not that big of a deal, but it is, because then it affects your perception of yourself. It affects the perception of like the people that you're interacting with and your friends, right? Because these are people that we know, like, and just to engage a bit more with like just the Gov case, like their main thing is that, oh, debate is too niche and nobody wants to like join it, so we need people to join it. Okay, why? Like and we need people to like be interested and understand debate. I don't understand how like you suddenly betting on debaters. Who the hell outside debate is going to know who David Africa is? Who the hell, honestly? And like you don't explain to me why suddenly people will know, right? And even if they know, like, and they want to participate in this betting, like, they're just going to bet. They're not going to go and like join tournaments and like do or participate in these things. And also, like, it's different from football because yes, football has such a fantasy football has such a large following because football has been established for for forever, right? Okay, and it's actually established. It's actually something that is like widespread, right? Debate is just too niche, so it's going to stay within these pools. Like, I don't see how anyone else outside of debate who doesn't already have an interest in it is going to want to participate in it further, right? So I really don't see the impact coming out of their case, right? People are not going to want to do it, like, and people are not going to get invested in it. And I don't see the value of, like, people who are already in debate being more invested in debate to a toxic level, because the problem then is like you probably get so invested in debate betting that it becomes the most extreme version of the conversations that we have about like people with rap, right? Okay, and the way that we talk about these people in the first place in our everyday conversations now. But now it's like you have stakes. The problem now is that you have stakes, and that's how it's different. Because in fantasy debate betting, the fact that you have stakes, the fact that you have money like put on this is going to make it 10 times worse. It's going to make it more toxic because you are then like making sure that like you want to change outcomes. You want judges to like go for like certain teams over certain teams. You want to make sure that you're like the person that you're betting on is doing well, right? You probably text them and ask them like a bunch of questions about the tournaments that they're going to, what they're doing to prep, like all of these things. You bombard them with these things, and we think that this is particularly bad. And for all those reasons, I've never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you so much for that speech. Now I'd like to call upon the deputy prime minister to conclude. Yeah, we're gonna do it.
Actually, I need water. Sorry. Okay, I'm not a betting man, but if you ask me to bet on this game, I think the debater who brought his girlfriend and his best friend to win this round is good. Wait, fuck, I messed up the opening line. Basically, I just want to say the debater that brought his girlfriend and his friend is going to win this round, and that's the guy I'm going to bet on. And it's not going to be the team sitting on gum. I think the debate is correct. Money is on the line, and that's a significant amount of pressure that's likely to occur. Sorry, can I just repeat this shit? Sorry. I know it's damn lame. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Because I fumbled the opening line, I'm just going to go into two clashes. Firstly, why is this bad for debaters who are betting? And second, how is this bad for debaters who are being betted on? First, I'll explain why it is bad for debaters who are currently betting on the system. And I'm just going to Tai Chi a lot of the arguments that's coming from this Gulf team, because a lot of their material is just, more access into debate. But they don't explain why that access into debate is good. If anything, I'd argue why it's significantly harmful. Firstly, I'll explain why the entrance to debating on their side of the house is quite unfair and why is it quite bad. The reason why this is true is that a lot of their case is just people will be more interested in debate and they can therefore bet on it. What the fuck? No, there seems to be a mismatch, right? Because they just explain more people will bet and therefore it makes it interesting. But I don't understand why is it the individuals are just going to analyze speeches. They're not going to analyze how good these speakers are. The analogy and the reason for this is that if you look at how betting on the stock market works, people bet on companies, yes, but they don't bet on the ideas or ideologies or the qualities of the company. They care about things about profitability. If you bet on an AI company, you don't really give a fuck about how AI works, right? You only care about whether or not AI generates money. The reason why this is important is that, like, people enter into debating for the wrong reasons. They enter into debating simply because they can generate profit or they can generate wins because they have high degrees of payout. What this ultimately seems to suggest is that if they do want to analyze arguments and speeches and analysis, or people want to engage in the broader aspects of knowledge the debate can offer, it's unlikely to manifest because the people entering this sport isn't necessarily because they care about argumentation, it is because they care about profit. What is the alternative on our side of the house? Look, we support people joining debate not because they can actually earn money, but because they actually want to know debate. When they actually go to their co-curriculums or they go to their actual clubs, it means that they have the ability to learn about these things. And even if this happens to a smaller degree, we are fine with taking this trade-off. Because even if less people enter into debate, that's good. Because the people entering debate are not the same people that bet on it for profit, but people who actually care about argumentation and analysis. This is important because it mitigates the significant amount of benefit that exists on their side of the house. As they concede, you have people like Andrew Chen creating the red calculator and like analyzing different kinds of speeches and argumentation. You have the Ryan Lafferty metaphor existing. But the reason why this will manifest on both sides of the house is because people generally do care about this sport. People do care about argumentation, which is why this is still likely to exist either way. I understand that this house supports motion, but what this proves is that the amount of benefit that exists on their side of the house is significantly marginal at best, or at worst, significantly harmful. The second thing I'm going to explain is to explain why the betting system is unfair. On the note here, there's a very big reason why you're fine with betting on the FPL or other forms of sports and not debate. Because debate is very rarely, if ever, meritocratic. Here is why it's different from regular football, and that's for 4 reasons. Firstly, judges. Look, debate is an incredibly subjective sport, but this also means judges get away with a lot of things. How many times have you heard judges say, oh, debate is subjective and we both rely on different intuitions, and that's why I give the rep call to XYZ. It's why I think your speech is at 76. It acts as a shield for them to prevent accountability. But the difference with this and referees, for example, is that they do get called out for bias. And the reason why this works is that referees have an incentive to care about giving correct calls. The reason for it is because it's dependent on their livelihoods. Judges, on the other hand, simply join and judge because they view it as a side hustle. They can get extra 250 ringgit. Or in most cases, judges don't even get paid and they just do it for the fun of it. Second is draws. Football rounds are fixed and certain, but with competitions, you can get things like pulled up. You can get tanked or boosted in one round, and this significantly affects your draws next round. Third, motions. There is never a fixed playing ground. When it comes to football, you know it's going to be 11 teams and 1 ball. But the problem with motions is that it can be significantly unbalanced. It can be significantly shallow, and that's problematic because it means that neither teams are actually competing on an equal level playing field, which is why it's harmful. Third, fourth, is also contingent on background, right? This is also contingent on where you're from and what contingent you're from. If your judges are good, if you're from a small tier contingent, it's why you're likely going to lose when it comes to certain rooms, which is why judges tend to have biases against you. In your ESL, for example, judges don't actually understand your analysis, which is why you're looked down upon. Why is this important? Look, this just seems to suggest why is it principally unfair. If the weather is bad, the chances of people competing significantly reduces, or everyone is nerfed in that regards. But when all these other factors occur, like subjectivity in draws, subjectivity in judges, and one team gets a significant advantage and why another team doesn't, which is why this betting system is unfair. But if you want, sure.
Do you think that debate is a 100% law, or is there elements you can better?
Yeah, but the level of meritocracy is significantly lower compared to football. The chances of luck in football apply to everyone. But the problem with debate is that it's significantly skewed and there's no way to combat against it. That's why systemic racism against ESL speakers continue to exist. But if you're an ESL speaker in a football match, come on, right? The only meeting one is on how good you are as a footballer. Second thing I'm going to prove is how is this bad for debaters who are being betted on. And I want to note, this argument is significantly washed out by the rest of this Gulf team, but they actually ignore the significant harm that affects debaters who are currently betting on. Firstly, I'll just explain why is it that this increased social backlash. The reason why this increases social backlash is because of the amount of pressure that exists on them. Debating is a game of luck. I know some people call it a sport, and I just laugh at them because I never had a referee come up to me in a futsal game and tell me I scored a goal. But no, I didn't credit the goal because it just wasn't clear. This game is subject to rep calls. It's based on motions and positions. But what this means is that it means that there are chances where you're likely going to lose certain rounds for unfair calls. But the problem is that in the instance where you do lose, it's likely going to be harmful to you. Why is this true? Firstly, the friends and support groups who are likely to support you are going to be less sympathetic when you find out the fact that they've betted on you and they lose, and which is why you're likely to feel worse and more guilt. Second, if your friends don't bet on you, you feel incredibly betrayed from the people because you feel like they don't actually care about you. Third, I know they call it fantasy football, but don't forget that money is still on the line. That the people betting on you are losing money, which is why they go up to you and they start treating you differently. They scold you, they insult you in your face the moment you lose certain rounds because they are more likely to feel that way because of the pressure. What is the impact of this? Look, it's just psychological harm. I'm very well aware that debate already has pressure and you already have psychological pressure, but this compounds significantly on their side of the house. We don't have to prove an overwhelming harm, we just need to prove a harm that's more certain to happen. Firstly, and this is important because debate revolves around community. If your friends who support you and betting against you feel betrayed, like this is just ingenuine. Like you feel like your friends don't actually care about you. Second, this just creates toxicity because debaters start to feel bad about themselves even more. Maybe you find some schadenfreude in winning a bet against you, but they don't engage in the scenarios where you do lose. Third, even if you win, it's still toxic because when people come to congratulate you, you don't know if they actually care about you. So the amount of genuine community is not there. What happens on our side of the house? The reason why this happens, why is it far better on outside of the house, is that people don't have money betting on you. So you know that their thoughts are genuine. Your friends come up to you and tell you that they actually believe in you and you actually feel seen and cared. If you lose a round or a big tournament, people are more likely to comfort you when they know that money isn't on the line. For all those reasons, thank you. Oh yeah, you tired. What? Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Firstly, if there's any football player in the room, I think they'll really be offended by the claims that side opposition is making in this debate to say that there is more variance in a debate where people are sitting nicely in an air-conditioned room and talking to others versus a 90-minute game where you're running on the pitch, where your muscles can cramp up, where the referee can make a decision that is against you. It is crazy that the logic that this team is relying on, that debate is an untrackable sport. And like responded to by my teammates already, we already are seeing technologies that track these things. This premise that some debate is something that's untrackable, therefore creating the system is unlikely going to manifest in the best ways possible, is something that does not make sense. But that is the first thing that I want to talk to you about in terms of creation of the system. The first thing here is what is the burden for us to defend in this debate? Because our burden is not to force people to use this application and say you must submit your data to this app and make sure everyone can track you. Debaters are woke, like what Kishan told you. If you didn't want to consent to your data being on this application, or you feel bad if you people were quantifying your ability as a debater, just rescind that particular consent. But I think this outframes a lot of the arguments then that we want to hear coming from opposition side. Number one, shit opens and judges are bad. Then just don't compose a team. Don't make a bet for that particular open because you know it is going to be a bad open. Nobody is putting a gun to your head and be like, bro, you better put a bet down like Etienne or something from Tabicat that's developing this app saying, bro, you better put, I don't know what Etienne speaks like, but yeah. But the second thing here is the ideas that debates are too volatile. And this will assume that even if this is true, Ryan, the there are too many variables in debating. It is something that's hard to track. Number one, it is systems like this is what will reduce that variable black box that currently exists. The more we think debates are untrackable, the more we just let it all up to the randomness that side opposition wants to talk about. That is when people are going to be engaged less in the sport because it seems more of a luck-based sport as opposed to something that we can quantify and that we can track. But the third thing here is this idea of other technologies existing. And here's where opposition gave a POI and thought they really won the debate already because they were like, but other technologies exist. Yeah, exactly. Other technologies exist, so that's why we support this technology as well. But secondly, it is only when we have a technology that can consolidate all these other technologies we have that people have an incentive to keep making improvements to this technology. Because not everyone is unemployed like Andrew Chen for 2 years and has time to develop an algorithm that can quantify debaters. But when you have an app like this, it makes development of a debate app into a potential job. It makes it into a project that
people can actually be invested in, that you can consolidate all these other technologies that currently exist. So in fact, we amplify and we activate a lot of the existing technologies much better because we create a target or an end goal for people to work towards. That is why we win very clearly on just supporting the creation of the system and what the system will look like, Judge, because just by proving that this system can consolidate technologies much better is something that makes debate as a whole a lot more trackable. It's something that we don't have to force people to participate in, and people don't have to feel shit, and I'll weigh this out as well later, but people don't have to feel shit for having their quantification and stuff like that. I think we win it very clearly on that first clash. Second clash though, and I think this is where like side opposition comes the closest to beating us, but it's not enough. Because what do we tell you here under how it benefits current debaters? We told you that debate is becoming too academic, too restricted behind a black box, too niche, and it's becoming a lot more uninteresting, resulting in a lot of people opting out. Well, back here was simple, that if we gamify the sport, we put betting into it because prediction markets are also getting a lot more famous. We allow people to draft their teams and make teams like star teams or whatever that they can gain points for based on how these teams and how these individual debaters are doing in majors. That is when you make the sport a lot more engaging. Their point here is, why do you have to bet? And here is why I'll tell you why betting is so important, guys. Because betting acts as this entry point for you to get engaged with the sport in the first place. Yes, it might be an addiction. Yes, it might be a vice. But it's that feeling of anticipation of, how will this team do if I compose it in this particular way, that makes them want to go behind the scenes and understand how these team compositions are going to fare out much better, looking at individual debaters and their styles much better, putting a principal speaker and a non-principal speaker together and looking at how they do well. And that is the ways in which we get people to analyze and go behind the debate more, because you cannot get that just by having like some stupid Excel sheet or whatever that tracks this thing. You can't have it just by putting random numbers to skills. You need to have the application of what those data is going to do, and that is betting for you to do well, drafting your place and looking at how you do in a fantasy league. The second thing then that I want to talk about under this is the main op push against this, right? There's two things here, and I mean it's all under the social interaction of debating, but there's two things here. Number one is your self-worth in debating. And they say you will feel bad if you are quantified by this thing. First, I already told you you can opt out, but okay, let's assume people feel like pressured or whatever to like, have their data or their statistic on this particular app because their friends and stuff like that are doing it. Number one, debate, guys, is damn stupid. You spend such a long time in this sport, you don't know what is happening, you don't know how many tournaments you've been to, you don't know how you have been faring, you don't know what your analysis or your skill curve looks like. What this app gives people is an ability to quantify those things. So even if they don't leave a tournament with a medal or a trophy, at least they see +2 to their skill rating after the tournament is over because they broke higher than the last tournament. +5 because they finally made it to the semi-finals or whatever. And that is important because a lot of times you leave debate tournaments feeling dejected, feeling like you didn't gain anything. But if I can see some additional points now on my skill rating on the app, that is something that's much better. But secondly, in terms of backlash, I don't think people are going to react badly. Firstly, this can just be like a simple banter thing like, hey, my guy, I'm betting on you this weekend. I got you my fantasy team. Make sure you do well. It increases the, the engagingness of the sport as opposed to people just being robots like, yeah, I put a bet on you. Yeah, don't look at me. Like, I don't know why that's going to likely happen, right? But the second thing is, I think at a higher level, because of these bets being placed, we actually attract more crowds to come and watch debates because people are betting on this particular thing. That means even for like EFL finals and ESL finals, which don't get a lot of audience, this is when we get to pull the audiences for those crowds to come and watch because now people are actively betting as opposed to just watching like open finals where white teams are debating. So I would argue that the social interaction and the benefit to current debaters is something that we win much better because based on the data that we are able to track via all the pattern recognition stuff that Minami already talked to you about in terms of what are your preferred argument types, your style of debating, your risk tolerance, your meta-analysis of how the sport is going and stuff like that. All these reasons show you that it in fact does become better for current debaters. But just finally, before I end my speech, this just becomes a lot better for the sport. The more these things become engaging, the more people join the sport, we actually see diverse, engaging ideas being ran, not just the same ideas over and over again. We see an innovation of motion types, and overall, we just see the sport we love continuing to be the sport we love. So proud.
known that every single debater in this room is part of a fantasy debate league, and everyone in the audience are betting on whether or not everyone in this room is going to win or lose, I'm immediately going to feel either extremely pressured that people are betting on me to win against Asan, or I'm going to be extremely dejected that people are overwhelmingly betting on this Gulf team and hoping that we are going to lose. I'm going to already be conceded the moment the emotions has been released, right? This is the problem that it causes onto the debating scene, because it already predetermines a lot of the things that comes out for a match if people already know that they are actively being betted on. That's the few things that Asan gives you. A lot of it, I'm going to note there is like a lot of new material coming from Asan's speech, right? First thing that he tells you is the idea of how you can rescind data so that you don't feel pressured. But I want to note two problems with this. One is that some people are not going to rescind their data and still going to engage in this fantasy debate league and in turn be betting. This means that a lot of the damage that we told you on the side of opposition still going to happen, because the overall damage that it causes to the debating atmosphere exists regardless of like the amount of people that are engaging in this betting, so long as there are people actively engaging in this sport only in terms of making profit. But secondly, it's like if a lot of people or majority of people don't want to feel pressured and they end up rescinding their data and don't engage in this, then a lot of the benefits that they take from Gulf that allows you the data collection, that gives you these apps, that gives you better tracking and better feedback system, doesn't really manifest to the fullest extent, because then the people who feel pressured, that don't feel like they're doing good enough, don't actually have their data collected that gives them the feedback that they so require, as opposed to the top debaters that don't really need that much more feedback anyways, right? But the second thing is they tell you that these these apps then give you the ability to track, and this tracking is good because it gives you more feedback, and therefore the unpredictableness goes away. But that's just not true. The tracking of like your statistics after a tournament is the result of that variance. So the variance in debating doesn't actually change. At most, you show what happens in a debate, but I'm not sure how, on their case, all these technologies are able to change how these debates happen and make it less predictable, right? Thirdly, is the idea of gamification. If I tell Pavik Koran that now you can bet on fantasy debate, he will just bet on debating because it is fun and it has own rules of systems of how you pair people around and how you optimize your team in order for you to get the most points at the end of this game. But it doesn't mean that you suddenly get invested into debate and come back. I just don't see what the link to that necessarily is. But the next thing is the idea of like, oh, but then you incentivize more people to create these kinds of apps that then benefit the debating community. The fact that we have the Andrew Chen rap calculator and we have pointsofinformation.com is already showing incentive that people already want to make these apps in order to make debating better. I'm unsure why is the tipping point then the betting part that allows more of these creations to happen. But if people want to create, we rather than come from a genuine place of wanting to improve the sport rather than to like serve the purpose of betting, right? Next thing is that Asan says that, oh, but if you see your elo go up, you feel consoled even if you did bad in the tournament. But this goes both ways. If I did shit at this tournament and I suddenly see my elo drop by 2, then it's gonna make me feel even worse, because then I'm gonna feel like my self-worth is even lower now. And the whole banter thing that they tell you just isn't really that true, right? Maybe it's true that like your closest friends will just be haha bet like $10-50 on you. But if the largest of investors, like the betters that you're gonna get under the side of government, I want the activity comes in only for the purpose of profits, is where a lot of the backlash that Ryan and Barsha tells you is likely still going to happen, because maybe it doesn't happen from our closest of friends, but it's likely going to happen the other people that are slightly more detached from you, or the people that come in purely only to make profit. But sure.
So the narratives of like underdog against like a lion team and stuff like that already exist. People already feel shitty if they're going to go against a rapier team. But if they can see that some people are betting on that it is worth it to try hard to win the round, doesn't that just make it much better than whatever the status quo currently is, where people just feel like shit?
So in status quo, my contingent mates over there also believe that I can win this round. But the problem is if I see the numbers of 98% people not believing in me, that's far worse than having an ambiguous amount of audience here that doesn't believe in me. But secondly, if people bet on me that I know there are stakes of money involved, that's even worse, because if I know I lose that money, those people are actively going to come against me because of that. But let's move on to explain what exactly is the harm is, because that's what this Gulf team wants to push. There's no harm in this betting. Again, all of the things that they tell you and how you are able to get better tracking and better analytics is something that also already happens. Why specifically betting is required is something that's still unclear. Because they tell you that it gives you more engagement into world debating. They don't really explain to you why is it that people engage in debating. Because if their own characterization is that people are bored of 1 hour, 2 hour long lectures or sitting in watching debates, then the same problem occurs. Because after you get past the first layer of betting onto these rounds, you are still going to have to watch through the 2 hour long debates that you are still going to feel bored by. So therefore, best they prove that people are going to opt into gambling, and then afterwards they are going to be turned off by debate, which means that people doesn't join debate. But at worst, people are going to join debates for the sole purpose of like engaging in this sport in a way that makes them money. Once this look like, I think my first two speakers explained to you why rigging is going to be a large part of how this fantasy debate betting is going to happen, right? Which means people are going to join debates if they understand that the amount they have to pay to enter a tournament is less than the amount that they're going to win in the payout if they specifically lose a specific team or in that tournament in order to get the results that they want for their fantasy league. Is where you get worse forms of community in debating. That's one. But the second thing is what Ryan already told you on the atmosphere, how people are going to feel about debating. If people constantly have animosity towards each other, or they're constantly going to feel like they can't interact to the most sincere level, is where the community of debating breaks down. And community is the large part where people can interact outside of the debate room. Because no matter how hard we fight here, we can always be friends out there, and that's important. But if I know that I lost someone's money, even if we're best, we just feel awkward towards each other. At worst, we'll actively be enemies. Right? That's something that's bad for a debating community. And yes. But last thing is, why is it that this is very different from fantasy football? It's because of the layers of separation. Because the damage that you get from fantasy football, football betting, doesn't really impact your star players on the ground, because they basically have celebrity status and live a different life for everyone. But the layers of separation I have with a lot of debaters, a lot of the times this fantasy debating also will occur other than the largest world stage, will also happen in local leagues like we do Malaysian circuit and all those, means that the levels of separation you have towards each other is very low, which means the effects are very real and very proximate.
Ayo. Look, I know this team sounds damn rhetorical, and the guy who fucked up his opening line is fucking unpersuasive. But I'm a betting man. So even if the chances are 1,000 to 1 odds that we win this round, even the chances of us breaking at UADC are 1,000,000 to 1, I don't give a fuck. I'm going all in. 3 things I want to point out in this reply. Firstly, football variance. Second, access to debate. And third, how people feel about debate. I know reply speeches, macam no one really give a fuck. Maybe you already have your verdict ready. But this is important. Firstly, on your argumentation about explaining why football is also varied too, and debate is varied, that's why it's fair. This is a massive straw man. Asan goes, players can get cramps, and you're running around a 90-minute match, so chance can happen. Yes, but this doesn't explain why chance happens equally. In a 90 football match, where everyone's running around, everyone is affected by the weather, by physical conditions in a football match. But girl, are you seriously telling me that red applies to all teams, like Chelsea versus Nottingham? Are you telling me that Nottingham has more red than Chelsea? Obviously not, right? Are you telling me that a motion balance that affects are you seriously telling me that motion balance affects all teams equally? That red applies to all teams equally? Asan, I know you're a Chelsea fan, but you know damn well how Palmer is playing. We deserve to be 6th on the podium. And how many times have I heard from you telling me about how fucking stupid these white people are, how their English is great and unbeatable, and how unfair it is for you as an ESL speaker to go to Worlds and not get your arguments credited. It's just unfair. But which is why the chances is just unfair lah. Second, on access into debate. So this is your winning argument, which is just you have more people enter, they can make jobs about it, and then you get super analytical speeches. Like if you're a principal speaker, you pair about practical speaker and see how well they do. Firstly, this is just new material on Asan about jobs and the extra legwork is there. Second, as I already pointed out, this is just done ingenuinely. They only focus on wins instead of actual argumentation. This is a fantasy team, so you don't get actual reflections of your performance with other speakers. Maybe Aston can only do well because their teammate is Rashvin or Wesley who prioritize practicals. Maybe I can do well as a response-heavy speaker because I have Yan Cheng and Basha who is more constructive. But the problem is that you don't actually get accurate data because the focus is only on wins, not on actual analysis. Comparatively, we explain the trade-off, which is true. Maybe you get less people involved in debate. Maybe it's true you have less of this data being created. But the problem is that our data is done more fairly and accurately by people who actually care about analysis, who actually care about an accurate reflection of speeches. Whereas on their side of the house, you only focus on wins and points, which is not an actual reflection of skill of debating. Third, I'll just explain how people feel about debate. So a lot of their push in regards to explaining our self-worth argumentation is firstly a mitigation by just saying that, it's okay, like I bet on you, it doesn't have to mean so much. And second is a flip, which is that debaters will actively feel better about themselves if they feel dejected after a tournament, that they see their scores going up +2, or they have underdog stories and people feel motivated if they see a minute amount of individuals betting on them. The observation I have is that they just don't deal with the pressure argumentation that we talk about, right? Firstly, I know a lot of our impacts are small, but I'm very okay with that because a lot of it tends to be psychological and social, because debate is a psychological and social sport. What this seems to suggest is that on our side of the house, we explain why the harm towards these debaters are significantly far worse the moment you put money onto these things. You know for a fact that when people come to congratulate you, it's just ingenuine because you know they have money betting on you. You cannot feel like an underdog, or you cannot feel like people actually care about you, even if you see 10% of people riding a lot of money onto you, because you know for a fact they don't actually care about your well-being or your worth. They just care about getting a massive payout, which is why when they come to congratulate you, you just don't care. But why is this problematic for debaters? The reason why this is problematic for debaters is they just feel dejected. In a sport that's already incredibly pressuring and isolating and lonely, you remove a lot of the communal aspects that we talk about debating because the amount of pressure that exists onto them. This means they give worse speeches. That means they get less things out of the sport. This means they are likely to leave the sport in the counterfactual. We explained in our outside house, when you remove that pressure, when people come to console you after you lose a big round in a final, for example, it's a lot more genuine, and we think it's a lot more important within this round. Thank you.